this question can have two meanings. The first one is, can non-human beings, non-human animals have conscious experiences? Some philosophers like Descartes thought, well, animals are just automata, they are just machines and they don't have conscious experiences. That's not our natural attitude. We think that our animals, our cats and dogs have feelings, and we relate to their feelings, and we feel their joy and we feel their pain. We have empathy with the animals. But on the other hand, sometimes nowadays we give, in Asia more than maybe in Europe here, we give man-made animals, like little dog robots, were given in Japanese homes for the elderly to elderly people, and they seem to be relating to these completely man-made robots as if they were having feelings. They attribute feelings to these little man-made machine dogs. So we seem to have a natural tendency to attribute consciousness to something that moves around and behaves like a living being, even if it's not really having consciousness, because we cannot assume that these dogs, man-made dogs, are conscious. So we might be wrong about the animals too. And where exactly is the cutoff point? It seems very natural to assume that dogs and cats are conscious. But what about mice or worms or single-cell organisms? One philosophical view is that there is no clear cutoff point. Something like consciousness is spread all over the universe. Each natural individual has a certain amount of consciousness. Even a cell, a single cell organism, has a very basic form of feeling or consciousness. A currently very fashionable theory of consciousness, integrated information theory of consciousness by Tononi, it follows from this theory that even cells have integrated information and thus a certain amount of consciousness. So if that's true, we would have to look at our world quite differently. Consciousness would not be a very rare event in very highly developed animals, but consciousness would be almost ubiquitous. There would be consciousness all over. That is the one philosophical question. The other philosophical question whether consciousness can exist outside of the human body is, can my consciousness leave my human body? Of course, that's an old view in religions, that my consciousness can leave my body when I die. It doesn't mean that consciousness then exists without a body. Christianity talks about bodily resurrection. So in Christianity, if my consciousness leaves my body, it can only do so by subsisting on or with another body, a heavenly body. But here, more mundane on earth, we hear about those experiences that people think that they have left their own bodies. And the most salient case here is the near-death experience, where people in certain extreme situations where their heart stops and they're dying and there's no blood circulation in the brain, all of a sudden seem to be leaving their body and witnessing what's happening from the outside. Well, we could simply think that's an illusion of a dying brain, and that could well be. There's one big obstacle here, though, that in many hundred cases that are fairly well documented, it seemed to be that these people had access to information, like what happened in the room, what could be heard and seen, that for all matters, for our standard worldview at least, they could not have had with their normal sense organs. Because, for example, they would see something, but their eyes had been covered during the operation. Or they would have been blind from birth, had never seen anything, but during the near-death experience they could see their own body from the outside and describe it in visual terms and describe a visual experience for the first time. So if that's the case, that would be very hard to explain with a dying brain. But even a dying brain has no access to sensual sense information that is not accessible to the senses in their current physical location. So if my eyes are covered, even a dying brain cannot give me true information, veridical information of what is happening in the room. So if I could really see what's happening in the room during a near-death experience, and it could be checked that what I saw actually happened and was not a fantasy, down to the smallest details, then it seems that our mind can somehow become independent of our brains. Maybe not of all physical realization base, but our mind would be more than just our brain. I don't think that there's enough evidence now to believe this, even though we have several hundreds of well-documented cases. There is not enough evidence to change our standard worldview, but there's enough evidence to make us wonder. Theories change and progress is made in the sciences always at the fringes. When we discover events that cannot be easily explained in the standard theory. And the standard theory always does very well with the standard cases. But at the fringes, at the edges, the non-standard cases, there all of a sudden the theory doesn't explain very well, and that's where the action is, where we should look for the interesting cases. And so I think those near-death experiences are interesting cases. We should very closely look at them with an open mind. I don't know what will be the end result if we have to change our view about the relationship between mind and brain. But we should certainly not just push those cases aside as non-interesting. I think they are highly interesting and they deserve further study.